What if your success isn't just about what you know, but how well you understand yourself? What if mastering your emotions could unlock your greatest potential? Emotional intelligence, it's the skill that nobody teaches you, but everyone needs. It's your ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotions while connecting authentically with others. It's not about suppressing feelings or being overly emotional. It's about awareness, control, and using your emotions or emotional data to guide your decisions. In this episode, we'll tease out 4 energies that shape your emotional world. And at the heart of it all, self-awareness, the secret ingredients that turns knowledge into real-life impact. Are you ready to understand yourself better? To lead with clarity? To build stronger connections? Then stay with us, because what you're about to hear could be the key to unlocking your best self. Today with me, I have a repeat guest from the first season, Debbie's boyfriend, Zoe's pop-up, one of my favorite people in this whole wide world, who I've come to know dearly over the last couple of years, my emotional intelligence coach, the president, in order of importance, by the way, and the president of EI Assessment, Mr. John Hughes. John, welcome back to the Me Inc. podcast.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Great to be back. Great to be back.
I followed from your first season. I followed how you introduce yourself.
Yeah.
I hope I was spot on.
Yes. If I had a business card, it would say everything like that. My husband first, father, pop, it's all those things. Oh, yeah, by the way,
you upgraded to husband from boyfriend.
Yeah, that's something where when we were in high school, again, it was big to go out with someone for a month, right? So it was even big to go out for 3 months. So it's the kind of thing where we celebrated the 5th of every month and some 1972. In fact, I guess the last time we acknowledged it was earlier this month.
Oh, really?
Yeah, March 5th.
Wow.
First thing in the morning, she says, she said, happy anniversary, you missed it. It's like we're trying to acknowledge the 5th of the month before the other one.
I like that one. So John, if you were to explain to the world who you are, and it's one of the things I like people to tell them who they are rather than me just reading accolades, explain to the audience who's John Hughes.
Yeah, I am a recovering psychotherapist. I always wanted to be a psychotherapist when I went to college and everything. In graduate school, studied counseling. Did some family counseling and marital counseling. And then I was fascinated by the skills, but didn't want to necessarily be a family counselor or a marriage counselor. And found a home for those skills in corporate. And that really happened in 1995. I was working at the New York Times in 1995 is when Dan Goleman's book came out on emotional intelligence. And all of a sudden it gave a framework, it gave language, and it was growing, right? In fact, after his first book, he said, I got to apply this to business. Sure, his second book was Emotional Intelligence in Business. But he saw the potential for it. Because it was not only working day to day, but day to day, what are day-to-day functions is leadership. So how does emotional intelligence affect leadership? And he kind of grabbed the concept developed by Salovey and Mayer, because they did the research up in Yale, and they were looking to unravel what are those influences that help us make decisions. And they found decisions. So they were trying to figure out at what point do feelings affect the way we make our decisions, to what extent. So it was that research that kind of leveraged Dan Goleman going forward. And Dan Goleman kind of went off there and not only wrote his books, but also contributed to the development of self-assessment that was rolled out by Hay McMahon. That was the ECI and the ESCI, the ESCI and the AECI. And both very interesting models, very good models. I think they're still both out there, but they weren't Goleman's original assessments. And I have a copy of Goleman's original assessment, because originally Goleman came up with the concept of emotional intelligence as competencies. In other words, he listed the 6 competencies connected with empathy, right? How do you listen to a higher level, listen for feeling, whatever. And he built competencies around 15 different types of skills. It was kind of a complicated model. It wasn't easy to work, but I loved it. And all of a sudden, boom, it was out of the marketplace and replaced with the ESCI and the ECI. And again, they're interesting, but I haven't had a lot of clients that have requested it.
Yeah. It's interesting, John. The podcast is an extension of my passion of of connecting with inspiring individuals and then taking some of the insights that they have and sharing it.
Yep.
So what's interesting about it, I was like, what do you do, John? How would you explain to the world who John Hughes is? And you went right into emotional intelligence.
Oh, that's right. That's my insecurities, I got to talk about something I know about.
Okay. But all right. So what is it that you do in the emotional intelligence space? And then we'll move on to how we define emotional intelligence. I realized that for the first full season of the podcast, as much as it was a podcast on emotional intelligence, rarely did we ever talk deeply about emotional intelligence. So just tell the world a little bit about who you are now and what you're currently doing.
Right now, I'm still the president of EI Assessments, which is an executive coaching firm, which is focused on measuring and developing emotional intelligence skills in staff and executives and managers. It kind of goes across all different types of industries and job sets. And through that work, I've started, you mentioned before, uncover some research collectively, what's been the impact of the pandemic over the last couple of years. It's also led me into, I'm currently a senior lecturer with Texas A&M, working for their engineering department around developing emotional intelligence in engineers. And I'm also a adjunct instructor with the University of New England, where over last summer I created a program on emotional intelligence development and its connection to leadership. It's like roots that kind of spraying out all over the place, the topic.
I am already getting excited because I did some research and we both shared that book, Emotional Intelligence Habits, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to go back to that soon. Before we get into it, my definition of emotional intelligence, and I'm pulling some of it from, in the most simply stated way, from that book, Emotional Habits. And emotional intelligence is managing the conversation between the emotional part and the rational part of your brain in pursuit of excellence. That's been my new working definition of it, in that all emotions are processed in the same spot. They run through the brain in the same way. So the emotional intelligence space is then developing the ability to understand the impact on emotions on oneself, and at the same time, understanding the impact on emotions on others.
Yep.
So, and again, in that same pursuit of excellence, it's not about being emotional, but it is about understanding emotions and being curious, being an emotional scientist, as you most recently taught me or talked to me about. So that's my definition of emotional intelligence. How do you improve that, or how do you synthesize it in the way that would be helpful to individuals listening?
I like the association between emotional intelligence and energy. Okay. Emotional intelligence and energy. And I'm referring to the book, The Powerful Engagement, by Tony Schwartz and Jim Blair. And look at the four energies that we have. And the first energy is physical energy. So I always like to know from a client, how are you managing your physical energy? How are you eating, sleeping, hydrating, exercising? And I'm not a physician, but I know if you're doing those things or not, right? It's just kind of your self-reflection. That's number one. So if you're doing all those things, that's going to help your emotional energy. And emotional energy for me, it's knowing how you show up. Just like you said, it's emotional self-awareness. It's your ability to manage stress. It's your ability to connect with other people. And if I have low emotional energy, I'm going to have a hard time doing that. If I have high emotional energy, I'll find the connections with people. I'll be able to put that high energy into empathy, into directing gift, into assertiveness and things like that. The third energy, so if my physical energy is strong, my emotional energy is strong, it's going to help the third energy, which is described or defined as mental energy. And mental energy is your ability to make the best decisions. So if you come into work on a Monday morning and you had a physically draining weekend, so you're not coming into Monday morning strong, means if your physical energy is off, that means you're not ready to start managing stress right away on a Monday. It means you're not making the best decisions. And it's going to affect the fourth energy, which is described as spiritual energy. The spiritual energy is defined as your ability to help other people. Yes, it could be about religious spiritual energy, but I like the definition of, I want to help my family. I want to help my friends, my loved ones. I want to help my clients. I want to help, fill in the blank. But it's around emotional energy. It's those two.
Yeah, I like that, John. And I rarely use the same buckets, but I do believe, the me in concept again is still to be your best self from a performance perspective, is that you will manage or make investments in your physical, spiritual, and mental well-being. And I really disassociate the mental and emotional energies because I kind of go at it as one and the same.
Yeah.
But that is worth exploring further. You did my first EQI 2.0 assessment in 2014 or 2015. You also introduced me at the time to the book Search Inside Yourself. You know, as I've said, and if anyone's listened to the podcast before, they'll hear me say those were the turning points, at least from my perspective, in cultivating self-awareness and a big shift in how I choose to walk through the world. I appreciate the assessment tool in that it's not static, it's not based on my preferences, and it gives me a different snapshot of who I am at a given point in time.
Yeah.
We talked about this in the first season. Every year for the next 5 years, I took my assessment and it was different in some way, shape, or form. I do believe that the EQI 2.0 assessment is not based on my preferences and it follows what's happening or how my life is evolving. So I think that the tool is powerful in that way. You use this as the basis of your self-awareness cultivation.
Right.
So how do you offer the value add of the EQI 2.0 assessment?
From an executive coaching perspective, if I have a client and I have an EQI report in front of me, what I like to do is be able to identify 2 or 3 developmental objectives based on that. And I want to be able to validate with the client, based on this profile, you don't like to give feedback. Is that true? Well, yeah, it's true. Listen, you're going to burn yourself out. Let's talk about that. Based on the data here, you don't like to make collective decisions. You like to be out there by yourself. We got to talk about your ability to build consensus. Or you'd like to work alone as a work, but there's usually something in the data that if it's not looked at and considered could be a derailer for a person when it comes to advancing their career. My job is to first listen to the client's story. Where have you been? Where are you right now? Where are you going? And I like to do that in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the discussion. Then from there on, let me take over the data and tell you, based on what you've told me, let me tell you how the data's complementing your story. Or every once in a while, I'll say, listen, the data, help me with the data. You have to translate this for me. I'm not sure what this means. So it's not as if I look at the data and I know the client 100%. I know a good chunk of what the client's all about and their strengths. And that's where I like to be able to say, how do you leverage your strengths to increase some of these other numbers? I see it as positive psychology, if you will.
Strength-based coaching, if you will.
Yes.
What made you gravitate to the tool after your career in counseling?
Great question. At the time that came out, I was working at the New York Times. Probably one of the most fascinating, intimidating environments you ever want to work in, because I was working mostly with your senior executives, your very successful environment. I was not a newspaper guy. I kind of moved over there. When I left IBM, they had a kind of a training and development position open, and I just kind of slid into the job. Next thing I know, I'm coaching executives. Next thing I know, I'm working with the head of advertising. So I really was leveraged. The opportunity was incredible. But there was a part of learning about the job and learning about the industry that kind of challenged me every day going into that building. I was there for 15 years. Every day there was a little bit of an imposter I felt walking in there. Which could I live up to the expectations of what was expected of me as a person who's been interfacing with executives every day? And in an organization that went through tremendous growth. We're talking about the early 90s. So newspaper, at one point, the New York Times was like a 12-part paper that would come out on Sunday. It was almost 20-page piece of, Sunday edition. I don't know if you remember them. They were ridiculously large. So we went from there to 1998, and boom, after 98, the advertising cliff, just newspaper went off the cliff. And everything was now shifted online. You didn't make as much revenue. Remember, 1998, they celebrated $1 billion worth of advertising revenue for the newspaper. $1 billion. And that was last year. After that, it all dropped from the newspaper. But I was there during that transition, and it was tense. It was angry. It was, you had competition within the organization between the online sales and newspaper sales. It was ugly time in a way.
And is that when you found your way to the EQI 2.0 assessment right around that time?
It was 1997. I went to the first class that they offered. I was that thirsty for an assessment. So 97 is when I got certified to EQI. 98 is when they was the highest revenue advertising, and then boom, started going down after that. And that was when between 98 to 2008, all the work at the New York Times I did in coaching people involved the EQI. If I could wave a wand to go back to all those people I coached back then, I wish I'd go back and talk to them. Because I'm a far better coach now than I was back then. You know what I mean? Because I saw some data. I was like a deer in the headlights. How do I tell this person they're not happy?
But John, what's interesting is that you were still doing your best, right? At the time. So you were still giving it, for your aptitude, you were still giving it your best, John.
Yep.
I like to think about it as, as a former athlete, I like to think of the assessment as really a data-driven way of managing me.
Yes. Yep.
Right? How many assessments have you done? Do you know roughly how many have you done so far?
I would estimate at least 25.
At least 2,500.
Yeah. Over 2,000 since the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is an interesting one, right? Because I remember when we went through our certification, and the one of the things I pride myself on being that individual who will stick to you when you say, come to me with all your question. And within the next year, I self-funded about 60 or 70 of them.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine how much data that is, right? Over that time. What did you learn? What would you say before the pandemic? And I know we've talked about this, and the pandemic is our new normal. What would you say was, for the assessment you did pre-pandemic, what were some of the key takeaways? And I remember, the first time you actually spoke to all the vice presidents at Prudential, you had a series of insights when you came into us. But what were some of the key themes that you pulled from the data pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, we're talking 2019, right? Up until March of 2020. I collected all the data up until then. And what it was is wonderfully healthy. And by that, I mean, you're a very strong goal-driven workforce. People knew where they were going to be in the future. They had career plans. They had, to the best that they knew, they could see the future out there. They knew what their goals were. There was a sense of confidence in the future. There was a sense of predictability about the future. There was some professional fear, but there wasn't societal fear. In a sense that we're all experiencing something pre-pandemic, right? Connections were strong, interpersonal relationships were strong, empathy was strong. So all the numbers across the board, it was what I would describe as emotionally intelligent, emotionally healthy. And you could find pockets that were low, but basically looking at the collective data, it's a straight line. In fact, one of the higher numbers was self-actualization, which to me, people feel that they're working towards a future, that they're consciously working towards a future.
So, John, you're going in and sharing some concepts or some themes, some buckets. Mm-hmm. Do you mind just quickly running through what the assessment is like and some of the buckets that you just touched on? John, this is going to be your opportunity to coach me, right? Because I think you touched on some terms that I think it's important for the audience to know. So the EQI 2.0, and again, you can help me here, keep me honest. The EQI 2.0 assessment it's subdivided self-assessment that's given in 5 categories with subscales in each of those 5 categories. The categories or the scales are your self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationship, problem solving, and stress tolerance. And then within those areas, this is how your internal voice, how you express yourself, how you build and maintain interpersonal relationships, how you actually problem solve, and how you manage and tolerate stress. That's as far as I can go, John, in a semi-educated manner. Take it from there, and how do you break it down so that, let's say, individuals get the vast dimensions that the assessment covers?
The first thing I look at, again, I'm looking at the data, pre-pandemic and comparing with 2024, which is the last time I summarized it. And what I did was basically I mark at the end of every March. And what I do, I'll take a year's worth of data from last year, from March of 2024 to March of 2025, and I'll summarize again to see if there's been any changes. From my perspective, the biggest changes, number one, is around, again, self-actualization. That's that view of a future. It's just something I'm going to be doing differently after. And what's really scary in a way is that some of these scores have dropped, and I don't see any movement, in a positive direction. I also see a drop in self-regard, the person's inner voice. There's a lot of people that carry around a lot of inner doubts about the future. We're going back to, pre-election. Okay, this is before the current, your presidential administration. This is how people were feeling. Up until March of last year, there was an increase in the imposter syndrome in the way, and by that, in many ways, by that I mean pre-pandemic, there was also a level of authenticity that you find among a lot of leaders. Where now, because of all the changes, people are feeling that imposter piece because there's a certain amount of change, a certain amount of discomfort that they're anticipating. And as you said before, we're all experiencing the imposter syndrome. I'd say it's at 80% it's high. I would say people are even cycling through even. They're having to deal with more change. Every time there's a change, there's another opportunity for me to question myself, question my competency. And that's all that negativity that people associate with change.
How do you define the imposter syndrome? Because I know a lot of people hear about it, but how would you define the imposter syndrome?
And from an EQI standpoint, it's showing up really strong. Okay, showing up, again, I'll call myself as an imposter going into the New York Times. Boy, for 15 years, most of the time I wore a suit. I had a tie, white shirt. I walked in there. I kept all my white shirts on IBM. I'd walk in there, I felt confident. I looked like an executive. So emotional self-awareness is there. My presence is there. My strength, my confidence is there. Externally. Internally, my self-regard is, hey, I don't know the newspaper business. Don't ask me something that I can't answer.
Right.
It was that that's the imposter piece. And when you think it picks a person new in a job, a person moving from one organization to another, that's where they start to feel that doubt. But regardless of the self-doubt, you still got to keep moving forward. So that's the challenge of the imposter syndrome.
But it's a great statistic that 80% or so of us do at some point in time experience the imposter syndrome.
The other thing about the imposter syndrome, I went back to the original article that they wrote, which was back in the 70s, I believe. And it was at a time where I think there was a lot of white men that were threatened by women and professionals of color coming into the workforce. So they needed something to push back on this level of assertiveness that they think they can compete with white guys. So they came up with the imposter syndrome. The women who called it the imposter syndrome, if I could go back in time and rename it, and I would call it something else. They said they would call it the imposter experience because it's not a syndrome. It's not a mental health issue. It was making it sound, if I'm a woman who wants to move their career forward, I need a mental health intervention. There's that labeling of the imposter syndrome that I still use. It's unfortunate, but that's what people connect with. When they talk about insecurities, they talk about being imposters.
So we're going back into it. So loss of connection, that internal voice, pre-pandemic. Any other key insights coming from that data? And then maybe we transition into what's showing up now with a bunch of individuals being asked to return to work, et cetera.
Yeah, right now you also see a big drop in independence. You see a big drop in emotional expression, a big drop in interpersonal relationship skills, because some people thrive in an interpersonal environment. Most work environments are designed for extroverts. So if I'm an extrovert, high interpersonal skills, being at home, working remotely during this time is kind of pushed back on my ability to connect with people. You see a drop. What remained high was social responsibility, the ability to build consensus. Because that was one area, you see this drop in independence, which means people are making fewer independent decisions around business. They're making more collaborative, more consensus decisions. So if you're not a good consensus collaborator, you're going to have trouble in today's new professional environment because that's what it's expected of. You also see a drop in problem solving and a drop in reality testing. Where does it come from? Reality testing is about questioning. And if the environment is constantly questioning every day throughout the pandemic, think of those mornings you woke up, you didn't know what was going to happen today. You didn't know from work, from a medical standpoint, from a social standpoint, you didn't know what was acceptable to you. So the burnout was there. Yeah, and optimism, not a surprise. Optimism was lower as well as stress tolerance. So these are the scores that, from what I've seen, again, we haven't bounced back from yet.
And so that's a little bit about what's happening since then.
Right.
Like what's been happening since the pandemic. So it's almost like a loss of identity, if you will.
I would say yes. Yes. And identity is very, very important. I remember the day after I left the New York Times, my corporate identity was I'm an executive of the New York Times. And the day I left the New York Times, what was my identity? That was the day I got my first business card printed because I needed to be able to say, who am I?
It makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you take all of that, how does, and I already have a transition, but how does one support their employees to be better, let's say, coming out of the pandemic? Now we have all of the work from home stuff being nixed, right?
Yeah.
What can companies do to support their employees?
They need to look at what is influencing their decisions. If your decision is being influenced because someone in Washington, D.C. has decided their federal staff has to be in 5 days a week, I think you have to question that influence. Is that influence the best thing for your people? Well, because we went through this long tunnel with the pandemic, and a lot of organizations learned a lot. And a lot of these cultures have been fantastic the way they've gotten through them. And I remember one executive saying, I want everyone back to work. I want to get back to the old culture. What do you mean the old culture? We want to get back to. People have to learn. They've developed your remote skills. Your business, by the way, is thriving. Why do you want to get back to what you think? Because I want to see my people again. Because I don't like this remote thing.
In the pandemic, one of the companies I worked at, the senior executive of the CEO had never been home since 1996. And now he's at home and wants to go back to work because he doesn't like it at home.
Oh, yeah.
His new normal was to be outside. But there is an opportunity to support the staff just based on the data. So if you had the one top opportunity, like I want to make sure my team is okay, that they feel that I fully support them, what is that one emotionally intelligent thing that you would say I might be able to do?
I think number one is listen. And what I've seen, based on the data, based on the organization, based on the industry, some managers pride themselves on their ability to tell and direct. In fact, some of my biggest breakthroughs with executives is where I've said, listen, based on these EQ scores, I would want to work for you. And they ask me what? Because you wouldn't listen to me. Why do you say that? Because your empathy is 85 and your assertiveness is 112. And your impulse control is 100, which means that you got to say something, you're going to put it out there. And I would say that you're not interested in my opinion. I don't think I'd want to work with you or for you. And I've said that to clients. Really? Yeah, look at the data. And what's it like? This data tells me you cut people off. You're the kind of person that you grab the microphone out of people's hands. Is that true? I've asked executives, listen, be honest with me. Have you ever cut people off from finishing their statements? Do you do that? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, there it is. Your assertiveness is higher than your empathy. Is that okay for you? And for some, it's okay for some of them. All right, well, then fine. And that's why someone like me wouldn't want to work for you, because all you do is tell and direct, and you're not looking to compromise and learn and things like that. Always interesting how adults learn. I think that's the other thing I'm always fascinated.
Yeah, I think that is a fascinating one, right? We can carry so easily things from one experience to another without fully stopping or taking stock that we are actually not in that same place anymore and probably don't need to reply or respond as if we're in that same place. That is a good one. Is there anything else that you'd want to share?
The one thing I find fascinating about emotional self-awareness, because one of the things you do with a client is you want to make sure that you're constantly contributing to their emotional self-awareness. My standard question is, do you ever practice deep breathing, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi? Do you do any of those? And now what I'm starting to hear is, yeah, I used to do that during the pandemic. Oh, do you do it anymore? And the response is no. So my follow-up was, how did you feel when you did that during the pandemic? And the response is, I felt great. Well, if you did something that made you feel good, why don't you continue to do it?
So John, and I appreciate the sharing the data between the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Is there any insights or anything that's significant that you're learning, that you're helping clients with in that same way?
clients, they've been very open to the data, to having these discussions. There's a couple in particular I think of. It comes down to emotional self-awareness. It comes down to the ability to know how you connect with the culture, how you use your power, how you feel about accomplishing what you're able to do within the organization. So emotional self-awareness, I see kind of as one of those anchor scores where when a person increases their emotional self-awareness, I tend to also to see increases in empathy. Because the concept here is the better I understand myself with awareness, the better I can understand you. What's interesting is emotional self-awareness seems to have dropped a little bit more than empathy. But almost across the board, all of our, compared to pre-pandemic, all of our emotional intelligence skills have dropped a bit.
And why do you think that is?
I think because we have all experienced a pandemic that has left us either feeling as either stronger or weaker. Either we're victims or we're leaders. They just naturally fall into a victim mentality.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The pandemic happened to me. Didn't happen. It happened to all of us. No, it happened to me. Every time it happened to me. They have the ability just to kind of focus on themselves as focus on everybody else. So that's a dynamic that, sometimes you can't take for granted. Some people just don't see that stuff.
From an emotional self-awareness perspective, is there any other insight that you've gleaned from that portion of it, right? So in the pandemic, we're home, everyone was walking, everyone was outside, people were finding yoga.
Yep.
Any insights there on how that is being impacted?
There was a national and growing, almost international acknowledgement that we are under stress. The norm has been thrown out the window. The pandemic has changed all the rules. The pandemic has introduced a level of fear, a level of sadness because of all the deaths, a level of anger, right? So all these very strong emotions were bubbling all over the place. And whether or not it was either mental health professionals right up into HR professionals saying, we got to take care of our workforce. Well, how do you do that? It's emotional self-awareness. It's deep breathing. It's meditating. It's yoga. It's Tai Chi. It's doing something to spend some time with yourself, to get yourself renewed. Sometimes people do it first thing in the morning. They start the day off very strong. But the recommendations back there is you have to take care of yourself before you take care of it. That was it in 2020, 21, 22, 23. And all of a sudden, that's kind of slacked off. I know a lot of people, like I said, they used to do it, but they don't do it anymore.
So say that again. Spend some time with yourself.
I think what has to happen is that you need some time every day to think about the day, to think about what you need. And the earlier in the morning, the better. Yeah, I like to have a little self-reflection to start the day. Oh, and yes, what do you have? What do you appreciate? What are those things that have happened to you? Call it luck, call it, kismet, call it whatever. But as a result, you're having a pretty good life like that right now. That's acknowledgement. And then looking out on how you want your day to go, how I want the week to go. I look into the future sometimes, where I want to be a year from now, 2 years from now. And that's why I start my day. And that's what's going to get me forward. And that's what I recommend to people. Healthy executives activate their brains before they get out of bed in the morning in a positive way. They embrace the day. Just like Olympic athletes embrace the day when they get out of bed. They activate their brains thinking about their workout. They activate their bodies thinking about their competition. So the time they get out, or do whatever they're doing, they're fully engaged, right? There's something about that where it starts getting out of bed. I had one executive, I asked him, what do you say to yourself when you get out of bed in the morning? This guy curses. He goes, did you say that to yourself? You're like, by yourself, you're cursing at yourself. That's a threat. Can we find something more positive to say? Just you're entitled to a good day. It's going to be a great day. Give it your best shot. Even it's something. Debbie was going to be carpe diem, right? For the 15 years I worked at the New York Times, it was always carpe diem. Seize the day.
A quick pause. If you're finding this conversation in emotional intelligence valuable, imagine what could happen if you put these insights into practice. Take a moment to reflect. Which of the 4 energies do you think shows up most actively in your daily life? And how might greater self-awareness help you lead, connect, and grow? If you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend or colleague, and let us know your thoughts. Now back to the conversation. Is there a reason why you think it went high and is now going backwards?
Well, I think the level of stress has dropped because people are back at work. People go back 5 days a week. People are planning vacations. Kids are back at school. So there's a certain amount of normalcy that's returned. But we're working in a new administration. And this new administration is known for disruption.
Right? But that's what I was going to say. If we were going back to a new normal, and this is a good segue into all the social stuff that's happening, all the stuff that's happening in Washington now, and how it's impacting all of us. But if we were going back to a new normal, that, I guess, agents of chaos that's actually there, it's now another new normal where all of those skills are coming back front and center, right? Yes. Understanding yourself, checking in with yourself. It was maybe 3 weeks into the new administration. And I was telling a friend, I was like, well, we're just shy of a month, but we have another 3 years and 11 months to go. So buckle up, right? So we're still early. So what would you say, and just segue into this, with all the stuff that's happening now in the social landscape, the deconstruction of the DE&I efforts and everything else, what do you think about that? What do you think is behind that? What do you think is driving that from an emotional intelligence perspective?
It's this emotional detachment of how these changes are influencing real people. It's just that simple. You're making major changes to major agencies that have taken years to be formed to get to a certain level of influence out there in American society that I think are supposedly doing good work. And if they're not doing good work, then surgically remove them. But this concept of a billionaire walking around a stage with a chainsaw to be able to make us a better country, it just doesn't add up for me. So what it does is it creates anxiety. It creates a feeling of, what am I watching here? This is surreal. This is not what I voted for. This is not what people died for in the years gone by. This is not what I want my kids to live with, my granddaughter to live under. There's this real sense of honest dysfunction. What's driving it? Number one word, I think, is greed. It's money.
Listen, John, I joke about this, and it's actually really interesting in that, so many of us are not necessarily impacted directly by what's happening, and it's easy to be apathetic to it, right? I think when we were in our coaches roundtable, one of the things that you brought up was that detachment of leaders from what's actually happening in the workforce or what's actually happening around them, and how that can actually lead us astray, right? I think that is something that is so important to be mindful of. Because, you don't just see it in Washington, you see it in many of the organizations that we work in. There are some leaders who are just detached from the reality of the day-to-day interactions and what everyone else is doing, right? So, and I don't know, that's the concept that's in my head. What are your thoughts on that?
It's funny, to survive in this world, you need a level of detachment sometimes.
Right.
Because, particularly being a natural empath. I've had empathy. I have a very strong level of empathy. So sometimes when I'm seeing something, when I see somebody cry, I just well up myself. It's just something that's always been part of me. So take that tendency and put me in an environment where I have to terminate someone for theft. And that person starts crying. Do I cry? No, I don't. It's a different emotional detachment there. You've done this to yourself. You got yourself fired for theft. You can cry, but I'm not gonna sympathize with you. But if you're a pet owner like me and your dog is dying of cancer, don't tell me that story. I mean, I'm gonna fill up. There's certain emotional connections that you allow yourself to make.
So then, how do you think that emotional intelligence, as leaders, as people, as we're interacting with each other, how do you think that we can then contribute to a more inclusive environment?
First of all, you have to, if you're head of an organization or head of a corporation, you have to want an inclusive environment, right? You have to go out there and determine what does being inclusive mean to you? What does it look like? How does it show up within the organization? And that, to me, is the distinction between diversity and inclusion, right? If I had to pick one of them, I'm just thinking this out loud for the first time, so I don't know what we're going to say. But if I had to champion one of them, I'd rather champion inclusion than diversity. Because I can see diversity out there. You can have a wonderfully diverse workforce, and your turnover could be 100% every 3 months.
Right.
That's not inclusivity. Now, I may not see diversity out there, but if people feel engaged and they're growing and they have the vision of the organization behind them, that's being inclusive.
I don't know if you remember this, right? But, you presented that idea to me 2 years ago. I was preparing for a talk at a conference. And just so the audience knows, whenever I talk about emotional intelligence or anything else that's in the HR space, John's my hype man. John's the person who looks at my presentation and gives me new ideas. And you actually did talk about these, that you did share at that time that diversity is something that you can see and inclusivity is something that you would feel.
Yeah.
And I actually used that in that presentation. And I did take full credit for it, John. I did not give you any credit for it.
Good.
But just so you know,
I stole from somebody else, I'm sure.
Okay. All right. So then we're good. So you're saying that leaders, it starts from the top, but let's say I'm a middle manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still leading people.
Yep.
I think one of the interesting things that I think that a lot of the emotional intelligence work, a lot of the personal development work are conversations and self-leadership. So is there just any insights that you can share on how we can actually, in a day-to-day interactions, make that effort to be more inclusive? I would say empathy. What would you say?
If I'm the leader of an organization, I always like having clarity as to who's doing what. It's similar to when I take on a new client. I take on a new client. First thing I want to know is, do you have the best people? Do they know their roles or responsibilities? They know how to make decisions. Kind of the nuts and bolts of a business. And one of my favorite activities was for you. You have a team of 7 people. Everyone takes a flip chart. And on your flip chart, I want you to write down your roles and responsibilities. Those things what are your deliverables? Then I want you to write down the decisions that you make. And then I want you to write down what are those activities that you don't like to do, and what are those activities you wish you could do. So fill it up on a flip chart. And then everyone walk around the room and read each other's flip chart. And then when you're ready, everyone's going to present the content in the flip chart and answer any questions. Because what that builds is it builds clarity as to who's doing what on our team, who's responsible for what decisions need to be made. So there's always some business basics that have to be revisited. And that's with you setting the right roles and objectives for the team with the best people.
In this current time, what's something that you think from an emotional intelligence perspective that a leader, and not the CEO at the top of the house, but what a leader can actually do to create that more inclusive environment? And what's that one insight that you think it would be?
I think there has to be listening opportunities, because what everyone's experiencing, just like during the pandemic, it's new to them. And those leaders that are creating some listening space, you checking in with their people. If you remember the pandemic, at the initial months of the pandemic, there was a Friday afternoon kind of get together, or there was some kind of social event that was there. And that faded off as it should have. It was kind of thing was artificial sometimes, and people don't want to keep it up. But there's something to be said for checking in with your people.
Right.
So I think getting down to ground level as an executive to know how your people are dealing with things, particularly with some industries that are being, again, affected by Washington right now.
Right.
There are some decisions, some organizations, they don't know what decisions to make right now because they're not sure how tariffs and everything else are going to be affecting them. So that's going to have a ripple effect of anxiety within the environment. So I think executives need to be really focused on what's the break point with this anxiety? At what point are these distractions going to hurt the business? Because it's going to undermine our potential.
The important part of that conversation, right? We're still, in many of us, doing knowledge work. The more at ease the nervous system is, the better people would actually perform, right?
I think people also want to know levels of influence. If you wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden say you have to be in there 5 days a week, 9 to 5. First question would be, why? Why are we doing this? And if someone says to you, well, because, the administration, doesn't feel people should work remote, how are you going to feel?
I think a lot of people are wrestling with that now, right?
Yeah.
And the pandemic forced on us a new normal that now people are asking us to move back in the opposite direction of.
I'm going to say the pandemic forced learning on us. It forced us to learn. It forced us to do things differently. And some organizations have stayed with that learn. Other organizations want to get back to where they were pre-20. Why? I've seen the numbers. I've talked to the organizations like Biogen, in the pharmaceutical industry. These are productivity has been high. It hasn't pulled back. It wasn't pulled back during the pandemic.
That's what's interesting, right? So about the whole emotional intelligence conversation, there's so much happening. Return to work, the DE&I portion of it, the fear about what's actually coming down the pike with the new administration. What advice would you give from that emotional intelligence standpoint to manage through such a charged atmosphere?
I would say, part of this syndrome in Washington is to get people to disengage. Part of it, because I don't know anyone who knows everything that's going on everywhere. It's just every industry. You can't possibly say, I need a full-time job to stay on top of all the craziness that's going on out there. My definition of craziness is change without reason. That to me that's my definition of craziness. So what I'm seeing coming out of Washington, it's crazy. That's
an interesting one, right? Managing change is one of the ways to actually stabilize our nervous system, because a lot of what's happening now, we won't have a choice in. So it's outside our locus of control, but we still have to actually move on, right? So I think that dovetails really good in for us. So I now we say emotional intelligence is important to managing you through change. If someone wanted to go out to start cultivating their emotional intelligence, what is that foundational first step?
I'm always going to pivot back to once I create clarity for the future, where I want to be in the future, where I want to be 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. I have to have that conversation with myself. I have to have that validated with people who are going to be on my personal board of directors. Who are those people I can go to for feedback? Who are those people I can go to support? Sometimes it's called a circle of support. Sometimes it's called a network. I always like the board of directors concept because these are people that are there for me. You have to have a board of directors. I would probably say back during the pandemic, yes, people had board of directors. They would tell you, who their go-to people were. We've lost that a little bit. So I think right now you need to you kick up the networking as well. You stay in touch with your industry because a lot of industries are under fire right now. For self-inflicted, tariff wounds from what I can see, right? So that's why there's a level of intellectual insult that's there. Wait, why are we doing tariff? Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are you reducing U.S. aid across the world? Why are you putting people at risk? What's this? Why are you ruining the reputation of the United States? What's the reason? And no one has given that to me. I haven't heard from anybody. All I hear is a lot of bullying going on, but no logic. I think that's the thing that really has, as much as I appreciate emotion, I'm missing the logic to what's going on there. And I know emotion alone, it's dangerous.
So the foundational part of it then you would say is understanding, curiosity, having a direction, and not retreating from what's happening now, but leaning in more to others, right? So it's not becoming reclusive, if you will, right?
Curiosity is incredibly important. I think curiosity is the difference between having a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Someone with a fixed mindset knows everything. They're not curious.
So it's not throwing your hands up, because everyone hears, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. It's tossed around often. In my head, it's what I say many athletes would understand, because they wake up every day trying to be a little bit better than they were yesterday. In your context, what is that growth mindset, and how do you see it playing into just, all the stresses and the professional upheaval, the shift in demands that we would have, because there is a significant amount of change that's happening. How do you then instill that growth mindset? You said curiosity. Is there a practical tool?
I actually had a client recently who acknowledged that 10 years ago they had a fixed mindset. They knew everything. They pushed back. When they got feedback from someone, they didn't listen to the feedback. They attacked the person giving him the feedback, right? He tended to overshout people. He was loud. He said, when I look back on all these behaviors, they were fixed. And I thought I was successful. I was making money. Now all of a sudden, these behaviors are playing against me because now I want to get into senior management. That doesn't work for people, that style. So you said I had to realize I had to give up my fixed approach to leadership. I realized I had to shift towards more growth. And part of the difference from fixed to growth was he took an EQI. And I had a conversation with him. Look at that empathy score. You're shutting people down. You're talking over people. You're not getting the best out of you. But we had a great conversation. And he credits that with kind of shifting him towards a growth mindset. Where now he had to listen to my feedback. Because he wasn't going to listen to my feedback. I'm going to get another customer who will.
So what's interesting is that not a lot of people listen, right? I think if you find yourself in a certain point in life, we become entrenched, right?
Yeah.
And entrenched in our thinking and entrenched in our belief system, especially if we're successful.
Yep.
It's the people who actually will continue to seek it out without hitting the wall. I find that part of the population is really, really small, right?
Yep.
You know, so that's just my thinking and some of the work that I'm doing.
Yep.
What are some of the concepts and new things in the emotional intelligence space that you are exploring now? What are you learning? Back to that same curiosity, growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
What are you learning about emotional intelligence that has you excited?
What I like is the intersection with technology right now. And by that, I mean, I don't use many apps. I have a couple of apps on my iPhone, but I found one that I definitely recommend. The name of the app is How We Feel. And it was developed by Yale School of Emotional Intelligence. And what you do is you set it for a couple of times a day, once or twice, 3, whatever. And it checks in with you. Say, hey, how are you feeling? And when you check in with it, it gives you a graph of different words so you can kind of put in what you're experiencing in the moment and why. And it starts to track over the week or month exactly how you've been feeling, your highs and lows. It also offers some resources like deep breathing exercises, things like that I found you're really very strong, very powerful, very accessible. So to me, that's something because what it does, it reinforces emotional self-awareness, which is that cornerstone skill that every executive needs to have, every leader needs to have, knowing how you show up, knowing the kind of culture that you're creating, knowing the kind of culture you want to create and moving in that direction.
That is a really good one. You actually introduced me to the idea of how do you feel as checking into yourself with yourself. Yep. And if, one of the things now I start with, how do you feel at most of my presentations?
Yep.
And is the nuance part of life is much more complex than happy, sad, or mad. Right?
Yep.
And that mood wheel is something that you are now near and dear to. You want to just go a little bit into the mood wheel?
Yep.
Because how you feel is so important in how you show up.
Yes. It's your calling card. People read that right off of you. They could read that level of confidence. So they read that approachability or like around interpersonal skills, right? How approachable are you? I've met some professors in college, professors, and I said, listen, your interpersonal skills are really low and your service is really high and your empathy is really low. He says, what does that say about me? It says that you don't like people coming up to you. You don't like being approached. He goes, yeah, that's right. I said, you're a college professor who doesn't like being approached? Yeah, that's right. And it looks like you create fear in your classes. That's true. Yeah, I like my students to be afraid of me. I said, well, tell me, professor, how do you, by you creating fear among your students, how does that help the learning process?
It's so interesting that, when we talk about self-awareness, how much of us, we are doing so many things and it's consistent. Mm-hmm. And we never want to see how we can be better or even be open to feedback.
Right.
That's coming the other way. One of the things that we have on the podcast and how it actually goes is that we want to spend the last quarter of the podcast helping individuals. I want to help individuals improve their emotional intelligence, show up with it. So today I'll flip it around. I'm not going to coach you, John, but you get to coach me in real time. We're going through something at work here now. And I went back to was having some challenges and I felt that the team, let's say, wasn't as responsive as I needed them to be. Right. And I was getting frustrated. So on that mood meter, I found myself, high in energy, but low in pleasantness.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
In some of the interaction. And then I realized that in reflecting on it, I wanted to make sure I had a constructive conversation with the team. I realized that I was high on emotional self-awareness. So I know what I was feeling, but I wasn't expressing it well at the same level. I didn't have a constructive way enough to share what I was feeling. I'm a poker player, right? Like I think for years we had talked about this, that I prided myself on not having individuals know how I'm feeling, not seeing it on my face. I also care a lot about the team. So my empathy was higher. Like I know we're all going through some interesting times. Everyone's stressed. Someone's new to the job. So I wasn't being as assertive as I would need to be. I wasn't speaking up. I wasn't asking for what I needed. So I want to go through this exercise with the team where, as we go through any cycle, we're going to go with what we learned and one thing we would actually improve for the next cycle. So you're hearing these things, John. What's your feedback for me as the things that I can work on? I did check in with my assessment, and that is, some of those subscales are structured in that way that it makes sense what I just said. What do you share with me?
How often do you meet with the team? Just out of curiosity, how often do you guys get together physically or virtually?
We're together maybe once every few weeks, but we are on virtually all the time.
It might be interesting to ask two questions of the team. Okay, since let's say you meet once a month. Okay. The first question for the team, and you're going to answer these questions. First question is, when you look back on the last month since we last met, what's one or two things that you're really proud of that you've done for the team, for the company, for the customer, for the client? List two or three things that you can think of that you're proud of. Okay, everyone got that question? I'm Nigel, I'll start. Since we met last month, I did this, I'm really proud of it, and that I'm really proud of it, And then go around the table. Mary, what are you proud of? What have you done? And people might be looking at you, why are we doing this? You kind of think. And you say, come on. You might remind people of what they did well that they may have forgotten about, right? Go around the table. And when you finish, you might say to everyone, listen, that's a moment of celebration. That's a moment of acknowledging that we do good things on this team. And we need to really stop every once in a while and acknowledge it, right? It's encouraging the heart. One of those concepts is. Now let's do the second question. The second question, if you reflect back on the time that you spent since our last meeting, what's two or three things that if you could do, you'd like to be able to do them over again? Okay? So if you reflect on the last month, list two or three things that if you could, you'd like to do over again. Now, if I had yesterday to do over again, there's a couple of things I would have done differently, right? Now, all right, I just think so. You go first. Let me tell you, if I had to do the last month over again, I would have done this differently versus that for the business. Or I learned I would have done that versus that. Let's go around the table again. What would you have done differently? What would you have done? Everyone tells you what they would have done. I would say that's a moment of learning for the team. That's a moment of me telling you what I would have done differently in a safe environment, which I think what we want as team leaders. We want people to be able to share their learning without any kind of repercussions. We talk about it, but we never kind of demonstrate it, right? And that's just that's a team culture thing. It's also a great feedback list. So a feedback approach. You come into my office and you give me a report, and I'm not, there's a couple things off. I say, Nigel, what do you think I did really well pulling this report together? And Nigel, if you had to do this report over again, what would you do differently? That's our opportunity to talk about your performance as opposed to me telling you something. Because people like to talk, they like to engage. So those are ways and that's a culture for the team. But again, celebration and those types of acknowledgments, I mean, that's something I think every team could use a little bit more. Because everyone likes that kind of recognition.
I like that, right? So I'm actually going to do that. So we get those two things. And then, so that's for the team. So we get that, we cultivate that self-awareness. But anything that I can do with the profile that I just showed you, right?
Yep.
With the stuff that I just shared with you on how I would actually develop some of those things.
What is your opportunity when you meet with them one-on-one? To talk about career, to talk about assignments, to talk about whatever. You might go in with a little bit of an openness towards feedback. You might wonder one or two questions. First question is, listen, you come into my office, John, listen, I'm doing a little feedback circle. I do this every couple of months. I'm going to start doing it now. Tell me something that I've done really well over the last couple of months. What? Yeah, tell me something I've done really well, in terms of the job and working for you. Now, tell me something I could have done differently, could have done better from your perspective. Same concept,
right?
About going one-on-one with people. I want to
Okay.
make sure that the environment is, I want to be open and sincere about it. If I say, well, Nigel, I can't think of it. Oh, John, listen, I'm going to come back again. I want you to think about it. Because you're one of my touchstones for feedback. That's why organizations hire people like us to come in and ask those questions.
I think, though, what I was trying to get from you, John, and let me make sure I mark it down, in that personal part of it. So what I said was the poker face, too high on empathy, low on emotional expression, high on emotional self-awareness, and then low on assertiveness. So I was going, was there anything that's particular that you can actually guide me to for that, right? For that issue
Sure.
that I would have, right? So that's where I was going. So if you wanted to like reframe it and give me a little bit of guidance around that, then that would be amazing.
So part of it, I think it always comes down to my mind, the relationship between empathy and assertiveness, right? Empathy is your ability to take it in. Assertiveness is your ability to speak up, to guide, to direct. So your tendency is to be high on empathy, but low on assertiveness. You're not going to be out. Your preference is not to necessarily direct them. You're there, not standing over. You're there to develop their critical thinking and for them to do some independent problem solving, decision making. So there's a part of you that's constantly looking for that balance between empathy and assertiveness. Now, when it comes down to them, I think the assertiveness part of the way the assertiveness may manifest itself is they may not be clear on what you expect from them. So it's worth checking in on the clarity that they have towards the goals. Might ask them a simple question. John, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very high, how clear are you on your deliverables between now and the end of the year?
Right.
Well,
okay.
I'm a 7. Okay, let's talk it because I got to get you up to a 10.
Got it.
Or I'm a 2. But try to quantify the range a little bit because it gives you a starting point.
So simply stated, work on being more clear with what I would require of them.
I think so. Because by you giving me that clarity, then you have to study me. Because if you're saying, okay, here's the clarity, John, here's what I want you to deliver over the next couple of months. As you're giving me the assignment, you're watching me.
Right.
And you're watching me in a way that's where the empathy comes in. Because you want to ask yourself, is John going to be successful with this? Am I picking up a successful vibe here? Or is John wiping his head? Is he disengaged? Is he doing other things as I'm giving him this assignment? What am I picking up to ensure he's going to be successful here? So sometimes just do the dump and run. Here's your assignment. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. How do I know you're going to be successful?
I got you on that one. If the listeners wanted to contact you, how do they find you?
Probably LinkedIn is perhaps the easiest way. But they can contact you and you can contact me.
I will make sure in the show notes we will put it in there and how they would find you. But that's the one way. Any thoughts that you would want to leave the audience with about the importance of emotional intelligence today?
I think, unfortunately, you have to anticipate a level of stress. It's almost as if, and again, I go back to that intellectual, logical insult. There are things being done nationally that don't make sense, right? So you have to monitor your input. You have to listen to the news. But I think you also have to stay connected to other people. And that's where there's a similarity between what's going on in Washington and the pandemic, because you don't have control. And something's going to be worse tomorrow. We haven't seen the worst of it yet, I think is one way of looking at what we're dealing with right now, which means that we have to go back to those stress tolerance, your emotional self-awareness, mindfulness techniques that people use during the pandemic. The reason I said it because I've been using them myself. When I wake up in the morning, I start to think about all the people that are suffering out there. Like, man, okay, how do I take care of yourself? It can only affect my own life right now.
I like that, right? So you back to the where you started was making sure that you practice the right self-care so that you can go out and accomplish the things that you would want to do. Any resources, I think, one of the game changers for me was the book Search Inside Yourself. Yep. But any new resources that you're finding that you would want to recommend to the audience?
Yeah, this came out 2 years ago. It came out in 2022, Stop Overthinking, by Nick Trent. I keep it right next to me because I meet a lot of executives, right? They have we're talking about the imposter thing. I show very strong, but I got a lot of doubts. I worry a lot. That means in the middle of the night, I'm waking up and worried about stuff. What that's
Right.
if I'm worried in the middle of the night about a decision I made, it's going to affect my physical energy. I'm going to be grouchy. I'm not going to be able to take on the next day. That's why taking one of these 23 techniques to relieve stress, stop negative spirals, declutter your mind, that's the kind of stuff people need, just like during the pandemic, because we're entering a tunnel of change right now. And we have no idea how long that tunnel is, how long it's going to last. But that's going to happen for at least a couple of years. So, it's long term.
I really like that, though. We're entering a tunnel of change and we don't know how long it'll actually be. So that is amazing. John, I would say on that note, thank you for the conversation. We had a definition of emotional intelligence and just kind of what the data is actually showing. To anyone who is listening, this is what I geek out about. If you have a question about this, if you want to get an assessment, if there's anything else that you want, like there is someone here who would actually be able to help you, myself or John, or if you are just curious about the subject matter and want to talk about it. I know John talks about emotional intelligence as much as he possibly can. I will be happy to do the same. So as we're wrapping up, Debbie's boyfriend, now husband, thank you. Zoe's pop-up, thank you. And John, you continue to be one of my favorite people. I should say on the last note to the audience, John's commitment to his own personal development is that in the last year or so, he's actually taken on editing all of the videos that he would put out himself. So I get to look at it, but I'm always inspired because he is so much better than I would be now. So John, it inspires me to stay in that continuous learning space, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
And until the next time we speak, take good care.
Stay well.
All right. Today, we explored the power of emotional intelligence, what it is, why it matters, and how the 4 energies and self-awareness can transform the way you lead and live. Remember, understanding yourself is the first step to understanding others. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media, share your insights, or leave a review. Your journey to greater emotional intelligence starts now. So let's keep this conversation going. And until we meet again in this space, take very good care of you.